It was the biggest night of their lives, the grand finale of their first world tour taking place in Atlanta. The music blared, the crowd went wild, and they stood on the stage as rock gods, he whispered. Artificial flames flickered in the cool night air, casting an eerie glow. Soft pops and crackles created a sinister backdrop for a story that had been passed down through the years. I first heard it from my older sister, then at summer camp, but nobody could tell it quite like Jonathan. The kid had a knack for spinning tall tales. Jonathan placed his hands near the fake fire, rubbing them together briskly as he continued. Blood Note and their lead singer, Alex Rider, had the world at their mercy. Jonathan leaned back in his folding chair and snapped his fingers at me. "Hey, pass me a s'more," he commanded. "Come on." I chuckled and glanced at Maxwell, who had chocolate smeared across his chin. "This fool better be talking to you," I said. Max shook his head, waving his burnt marshmallow back and forth to cool it down. With a smile, he popped the white, gooey treat into his mouth. "Nope," he replied. "Come on," Jonathan pleaded. I rolled my eyes and handed him the last s'more that sat on my plate, waiting to be devoured. "Here, but no more interruptions. Finish the story," I insisted. He took a large bite, and the chocolate wonder crumbled around his lips. My gaze shifted to my empty plate, and I sighed as Jonathan licked his fingers and resumed his tale. Every note seemed as if it were meticulously crafted by a higher power. In fact, they were the gods of rock on roll. Their energy was otherworldly, their allure unmatched, Jonathan said, devouring the last remnants of the s'more. Blood Note was my favorite band. In fact, they were everyone's favorite band. They were like the Beatles or Michael Jackson, something that only comes around once in a lifetime, something you have to see before it's gone. People say Alex made a pact with the devil for his fame. Nobody wants to believe it, but it fits perfectly. A young nobody fresh off a Georgia farm shows up in LA and fills in for a sick singer rewriting rock history with every word that leaves his lips. That kind of thing doesn't happen. Not to people like you and me. Within 2 years, Blood Note was everywhere. You couldn't turn on a radio or TV without hearing them. They had hit after hit and were in talks of making a movie after their tour. They were burning bright, but everything that burns bright also burns fast. Alex learned that the hard way, and he also learned that the devil always collects, Jonathan said. My mum said that Alex was living on borrowed time. She said he knew his days were numbered, which is why. Jonathan interrupted Maxwell's eager statement by flicking a pebble into Maxwell's melted marshmallows. Did she mention that before or after she engaged in extracurricular activities with our gym teacher? Jonathan interjected. "I'm the one telling the story here, fat boy," he said. Now, we all exchanged glances for a moment until Maxwell leaned forward and stuffed the marshmallow into his mouth, pebble and all. He swallowed it with a gulp, then thumped his chest and burped. "Tasty," Maxwell said, and we burst into laughter. Jonathan wiped away tears from his eyes and continued. Legend has it that after the show, Alex retreated to his private studio in his sprawling mansion in Atlanta. That's where he recorded his first solo song, The Old Man, is a haunting tale of Alex selling his soul. The song possessed such power that the devil himself didn't want it heard, so he came for Alex that very night. The song remains lost to the world, and Alex Rider perished with his blood-stained guitar in his hands, leaving behind a note that read, "The devil made me do it." Jonathan had a way of captivating us with his storytelling. Something about his delivery kept us hanging on his every word, and both Maxwell and I were eagerly waiting for more. But none came. We stared at him for a moment, then I burst into laughter. "Bullshit," I said. Jonathan laughed and placed his hand over his heart. "I swear, the devil killed him." Maxwell and I stood up. Alex died from a drug overdose. There was no bloody guitar or any of that shit. Maxwell retorted as we began making our way back to the house. Jonathan grabbed his flashlight and rolled his eyes. "Because you were there, right, lardass?" "Jonathan Jai." Maxwell spun around to face Jonathan. He had been struggling with his weight all his life. But this year his father had been pressuring him to lose some pounds. He was being sent to a camp for healthy choices, which was just a nice way of saying fat camp. "Screw you, Johnny," I'm not fat, Max shouted, then turned and walked into the house. We stood there for a moment, then burst into laughter before following him inside. Take it easy, Max, I said, slinging my arm around his shoulder. Jonathan's just mad that his story doesn't make any sense, I said with a grin. Jonathan rolled his eyes as he retrieved the sodas from the fridge. He placed them on the counter one by one and looked at us. All right, if I'm so full of it, what about the song? He challenged. What song? I replied. I snatched the cold can and popped it open, turning it upside down. I chugged it like I had been searching for its sweet liquid for my entire life, which is kind of true. Soda had been banned at my house this month. My mom was on some kind of diet, and unfortunately, the rest of us had to follow suit. I despised diets. It felt like they were designed to slowly kill people, which is probably why the word dumb is in it. The song he was working on before he died. Where is it? Jonathan asked. I chuckled. Maybe he didn't get around to finishing or even starting the song because, well, he died, I retorted. Max started choking on his soda, spitting some of it out as he burst into laughter. So, what the hell, fat boy? Jonathan said. Max nodded, still laughing. That's true. He overdosed. I doubt there even is a song. Jonathan whipped out his phone and pulled up a video. What's this? I asked. He pushed play and Max and I leaned in. Is it the song? Max asked. Jonathan nodded. Yes, Max, I have the world's most valuable song just sitting on my phone. It's an interview with his girlfriend, Melody, Jonathan explained. On the screen, a dirty blonde with ice blue eyes stared right at us. I felt trapped in her gaze. She didn't utter a single word, but I knew I would follow her into hell if she asked. She's got some tits on her, huh? Max said. My head turned towards him and I smacked his soda, causing it to splash into the sink. Jonathan laughed and I redirected my attention to the screen. Her voice had a husky southern twang to it. I smiled. Is she a singer too? I asked. Max patted me on the back. Uh-oh, Richie's in love. Do you have her number? Maybe her address, a list of all her recent whereabouts in the last 24 hours. You know how Richie likes to know everything about his girls, Max teased. But Jonathan stopped the video and laughed. You're a dick, Max. Richie likes to know everything about everything, he said. Bye. I closed my eyes, not fighting the truth. It was accurate. I had an insatiable need to know things. It was just a part of who I was. It creeped out girls and annoyed everyone else, but I couldn't help it. But she was last seen with Alex Ryder. She's buried right next to him, Jonathan revealed. Wait, she's dead? I asked. Max leaned on the counter. That's messed up. You were mentally banging a dead girl, he said, sounding disgusted. I turned my head towards him, a puzzled expression on my face. Shut the hell up! Then I redirected my gaze to Jonathan. She's dead? I asked. Jonathan nodded solemnly. Yeah, she hanged herself the night after that interview. She said. She wanted to hear Alex one last time, Jonathan explained, and he pressed play on the video. Silence engulfed the kitchen, broken only by the eerie static emanating from Jonathan's cell phone. The video playing was ancient, dating back to 1992, when Alex took his own life and Melody followed suit. Resting my hands under my chin, I leaned in, captivated by Melody's words. No, she said softly. He wasn't anything like that. Alex was sweet and beautiful. The reporter's laughter cut Melody's statement short. Sweet is a stretch, don't you think? We're talking about Alex Ryder, the reporter interjected, leaning closer as the camera zoomed in on Melody's face. Once again, his words filled the air. Come on now, Melody. Are we supposed to believe that Alex Ryder, the bad boy of rock and roll, was really the boyfriend of the year? Melody's gaze shifted downward, her hands twisting and folding a napkin throughout the entire ordeal. While the reporter's tone softened. Melody. She raised her head, her blue eyes seemingly locking with the camera, and I felt as though she was staring directly at me. I knew it was just a video, but there was an eerie sensation that she could crawl out of the screen and claim my soul. Overwhelmed, she covered her face with her hands, tears streaming down. We were spectators to the unraveling of a broken heart. I shook my head and walked over to the living room when I heard her sultry whisper. He wasn't perfect, but even the devil had wings. I turned, and our eyes met briefly before the screen faded to black. I wasn't sure if the warm feeling that was engulfing me was love or me pissing myself. I couldn't deny her haunting beauty, even though she had been dead for the past 3 decades, making her more haunting than beautiful. So, his groupie gave an interview. Maxwell spoke up, his mouth full of marshmallow. "What the hell does that have to do with his song?" he asked. "Where the hell are you pulling those out from? Your ass?" Jonathan asked. I chuckled softly, feeling uneasy, as I laid my blanket on the living room floor. Jonathan combed his fingers through his curly, brown hair, pocketing his phone before walking away. "It's not the interview, it's what she did after it," Jonathan explained. "Kill herself?" Maxwell asked. "What? No, fat boy," Jonathan snapped. Before we could react, the staircase lights flicked on and Jonathan's father shouted, "You little brats better get your butts in bed. It's 2 a.m. I've got work in the morning." We exchanged glances and burst into laughter. Maxwell rolled out his sleeping bag and I settled on the floor with a blanket and a pillow. Jonathan claimed the couch, showing no concern for hospitality or treating guests right. In his world, he was the alpha and we were his pack. When Alex died, he left everything to Melody, and before she took her own life, she ordered that all his money be used to keep the mansion standing, Jonathan whispered. "Yeah, it's near Piedmont Park. I pass by it when I go to Little League," I chimed in. "What's it like?" Maxwell asked. "Kind of creepy, but it's still standing. It's got a shit ton of vines on it and some broken windows," I replied. "Well, at least her last wishes were honored," Maxwell commented. "No one can enter. It's meant to remain there forever without a soul stepping inside," Jonathan added. "And I'll ask again. What the hell does that have to do with the song?" Maxwell muttered. Jonathan rolled over in the darkness, his face hidden from view. However, I knew he wore a $1 million grin as he spoke. If no one can go in, fat ass, that means. "It's still in the house," Maxwell and I chimed in simultaneously. "Simo? You..." Jonathan chuckled and rolled over. "The geniuses have finally entered the chat," he teased. It was a random sleepover conversation among 3 naive kids. If I had known that our words that night would unleash the chaos that followed, I would never have set foot in Jonathan's house. But if everyone could predict their mistakes in advance, life would be hella boring. Entai! It was Wednesday night, and my coach always scheduled late practices on Wednesdays. My mum believed it was an excuse for him to come home at midnight, blaming the team when he was actually seeing the frozen yogurt girl down the street from the park. She had mentioned it more than once, just not to me. Usually it was directed at some other player's mum before the game started. Sorry, I'm getting off track here. It was late, and my mum asked Coach Mayfield to give me a ride home. "Kid, why don't you take a few laps around the block? Swing by the yogurt shop, say around 10, Coach whispered. I stared for a while, perhaps too long, as he snapped his fingers, questioning if I was paying attention. I wasn't, as my focus had shifted to the sidewalk across the street. There, in his worn-out blue jeans and tattered Braves t-shirt, stood Jonathan. "Hey, are you going to give me any problems?" Coach shouted. My head snapped toward Coach Mayfield, and I shook it vigorously. "No, sir. I'll be the best little alibi I can be, sir. You can count on me, sir," I shouted, clicking my heels together in a mock salute. Coach rolled his eyes and walked off towards his car. 10, he hollered. Yeah, I mumbled to myself before turning my attention back to Jonathan or where he had been, because when I looked at the sidewalk again, he had vanished. I dashed across the street, extending my hand as if it could protect me from the road rage maniacs determined to turn me into a pancake. With some luck and a couple of prayers, I made it safely to the other side. Cupping my hands around my mouth, I called out, "Jonathan." My hands dropped to my sides as the seconds ticked by without a response. Maybe it wasn't him. "You limp dick." Jonathan's voice echoed through the street, causing me to whirl around and hope that no one had overheard. There was no one on the street, just passing cars. I sprinted toward his voice, my backpack swinging wildly in the cool night air. Coming to an abrupt stop, my sneakers screeched against the pavement. I stood motionless, staring at the empty sidewalk before me. I caught a glimpse of the streetlight's glow and slowly took a few steps backward. I wasn't entirely sure, but out of the corner of my eye, I swore I saw him. It was a fleeting white blur, and I would have missed it if not for his haunting smile. It stretched from ear to ear, a smile I had never seen on his face before. Jonathan smiled occasionally. He wasn't some emo death to happiness kind of guy. But this was different, so different that I fought an internal battle not to turn my head. Thoughts screamed at me. Run. Run back to the park. Hell, run to the damn yogurt shop if you have to. Just don't look. You look like you've seen a ghost or something, Jonathan asked, his voice swimming in curiosity. I chuckled and shook my head. Dropping my gear to the ground, I disregarded the fear welling up inside me and turned to face Jonathan, who stood on the other side of a massive black gate. His arms were crossed and he wore a puzzled expression. "You all right, man?" he inquired, concern evident in his voice. Nodding, I removed my ball cap, running my hand over my black waves. "Just tired," I replied, taking a step back to examine the imposing gate that separated us. Despite its age and rust, it stood tall. My gaze focused on the faded gold letters above the chipped black paint, spelling out AR. I whispered the letters to myself, extending my hand to touch the cursive inscription. As my fingertips lightly grazed the cool metal, a chill coursed through my body. My hand quickly came back. Shuddering, I attempted to shake off the eerie sensation. Jonathan burst into laughter, and I responded by defiantly flipping him the bird. He reached out, rattling the gate with his hands. The metallic clatter echoed through the night, causing me to place my hands on the gate to keep it steady. "What the hell, Jonathan?" I hissed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Jolly brang? What?" he asked. "You trying to let the entire city know you're here?" I snapped back. Jonathan rolled his eyes. "Whatever, you coming or not?" he asked. "Well, how did you get over there?" I asked. Jonathan slid his hands into his pockets and grinned. "How do you think?" he teased. Once again, my eyes surveyed the imposing gate, and I shook my head. "Nope," I whispered. Laughter erupted as Jonathan mocked me. "Don't be a little chicken shit. It's not that high," he taunted. "It's like..." Rubbing the back of my neck, I stared at the pointed metal bars of the gate. My gaze shifted back to Jonathan. "Black boy dies during Bali isn't a headline my mom wants to see in the morning. Besides, my coach is waiting for me at..." I began, but he cut me off. "I found it," Jonathan whispered. He said it so softly that it took a moment for the message to process in my head. "You found it?" I asked. "Yes," he said with a mischievous grin spreading across his face. "You found it!" I exclaimed, my heart racing. "Shut the hell up!" Jonathan shouted. "Get your ass in here. It's stuck in the recorder and I need help to get it out," he said. He found it. The last song, created by a rock god, was just one high-ass climb away. Rolling my shoulders, I dashed forward, leaping into the air. My body collided with the metal gate, and again the rattle of the gate took over the night. I glanced down at Jonathan, who was waving his hands, frantically hurrying me along. I strained and grunted, ascending like a determined squirrel chasing a nut. My hand gripped the spear-headed tips of the gate, only to be met with a searing pain. When I pulled back, I felt the quick tear of my skin. "Son of a bitch!" I shouted, glancing at my right hand, as a stream of dark red ran down my arm, quickly staining the white sleeves of my uniform. Attempting to close my hand, the searing pain prevented it, forcing my palm to remain open. I could see raw crimson flesh protruding from my injured palm. "Hurry the fuck up!" Jonathan shouted. "I cut my hand, asshole!" I hollered back, looking down at Jonathan's irritated face. I rolled my eyes and pushed through the climb with only one hand. This time, I avoided the death arrows and maneuvered between them. "Aim for the grass," Jonathan advised. Following his instruction, I dropped onto the high grassy lawn of the rock god's domain, lying there and staring up at the starry night sky. The pain in my hand intensified, and the blood caused the grass to stick to my arm. My uniform was ruined, and my coach would give me hell, but the wrath of my mom would far worse. But none of that mattered at that moment, because he found it. You okay? Jonathan asked, extending his hand to help me up. I rolled my eyes and sat up. I'm fine, you ass hat. You could have warned me those things were sharp. Slowly, I turned my hand over, feeling my skin tighten as excruciating pain surged through me. Closing my eyes, I bit down on my lip. God damn, that thing got you good, man, said Jonathan. Peeking through my right eye, I could only make out a blurry image of red. I mustered the courage to fully open my eyes and saw the flap of bloody skin hanging from what remained of my palm. Oh shit, I cried. My trembling finger pushed the flap of flesh back into my palm, causing Jonathan to avert his gaze to avoid the gushing river of blood. Wrap it up with something. That thing is nasty, Jonathan suggested. Using my left hand, I removed my jersey, slowly pulling it over my head. Tearing it apart, I gently wrapped the fabric around my injured hand, closing my eyes as I tightened the white cloth around the bloody wound. Finally, I rose to my feet. My mom is going to kill me, I muttered, examining the torn and blood-stained fabric of my uniform. It looked like I got mugged outside of Georgia Tech, which I decided was going to be my story if someone asked me. These things are expensive, I added. Jonathan waved dismissively at my words as he headed toward the steps of the house. Once we get this song, you can buy that lousy little team, he said, grinning. We stood side by side, gazing at the cracked stone steps that led to a weathered door. The house exuded the essence of 90s rock, with its extravagant features and badass vibe. Two worn and chipped gargoyles stood tall beside the steps while stained glass windows showcased faded, dark colors and intricate patterns. On the left side of the yard, a naked woman enveloped in rose vines stood proudly, her thorn-inflicted cuts oozing a now faded shade of dark red. Guarding the right side of the yard was a large depiction of a monstrous man, wielding two hammers above his head to form an X. At his feet lay another image of the same figure, pierced by railroad spikes and lying in a faded pool of blood. This window had a large hole in it by the right hammer, most likely done by a kid like me. Someone too scared to tell his friends. He just wanted to go home and forced himself to do something stupid. You coming? Jonathan asked. What? His words ripped me from my internal thoughts and tossed me back into this reality of fear and pain. I clenched my hand, hoping to force the stinging from my flesh, even if it was just for a moment. Glancing at Jonathan, who had already ascended the stairs to the front porch, I muttered, Yeah, my fucking hand hurts. You want to head back home? Jonathan asked. As I climbed the stone steps, I genuinely contemplated his question. I could turn back and get chewed out by my coach and my mom, or I could continue, risk blood poisoning, get chewed out anyway, and be rewarded with the final ballad of a legend. The choice was undeniably difficult. Hell no, I don't want to go home, I shouted. Jonathan laughed, and as I joined him, he playfully bowed. Well then, after you, good sir, he said. You. Thank you, kind sir, I chuckled, grabbing the doorknob with my good hand. The cool metal twisted, and I heard the satisfying click of the door. Giving it a push, I watched as the door moved slightly, revealing a narrow gap through which I could catch a glimpse of the mansion's interior. It's stuck, I remarked. What? Jonathan said, and he ran his shoulder into the door. I heard a thump, but the only thing that moved was Jonathan, who tumbled back onto his ass. I burst into laughter. Shut the hell up, Jonathan shouted, dusting himself off and rising to his feet. That's weird, he said. It's an old house. The hinges are probably just stuck and need some oil or something, I reasoned, leaning closer to the gap and pressing my face against the wood. Moonlight spilled onto the bottom steps of the staircase, but I couldn't see anything else. I pushed against the door again, but it still wouldn't budge. No, Jonathan whispered, running his fingers through his unruly brown curls. After a pause, he continued, That's how I got in. My head turned slowly towards him, and I noticed his confused expression and pale complexion, as if he was about to be sick. Are you all right? I asked. Yeah, man. It's just freaky, that's all. Come on, we can get in through the basement. Jonathan took off down the steps, motioning for me to follow. That's where the studio is anyway, he said. My attention turned back to the gap in the door, leaning in once again to catch a glimpse. The moonlight shined on the staircase, and I leaned in closer to see if I could get a look at what was jamming the door. A sudden breeze grazed my eyelashes, causing me to blink. Before I could reopen my eyes, the door forcefully slammed into my head. "What the son of a bitch?" I exclaimed, gripping the point of impact. I glanced at the closed door, then back at the path Jonathan had taken towards the back of the house. My hand was throbbing with pain, and now I had a nice knot on the side of my head. Now, tonight was becoming quite the adventure. I took off down the steps and dashed through the yard until I almost collided with Jonathan, just barely stopping myself from knocking him over. Jonathan wore that infuriating shit-eating grin again. "What the fuck is wrong with you?" he asked. "Damn door busted me in the head," I grumbled. Jonathan rolled his eyes and turned toward the open basement door. Or was it a cellar? I had no idea what rich people called their lower floors. Leaving me standing in the tall grass, Jonathan proceeded into the house. "Stop messing around and get in here," Jonathan called back. I watched as he disappeared into the darkness beyond the cellar door. Hesitation engulfed me. If I were to be honest, it had plagued me since I left the park. Lowering my hand from my throbbing head, I took a few hesitant steps toward the doorway. "Jonathan," I whispered, but there was no response. The air hung still, devoid of any sound except for the drum solo of my own heart. Taking another step closer to the dark abyss of the cellar, I called his name once more. "Jonathan!" Bang! This time, the cellar door creaked open wider, as if preparing to consume me like a snake devouring its prey. Closing my eyes and shaking my head, I mustered the courage to step into the darkness, following Jonathan's lead. My footsteps reverberated as I descended the stone steps. The moment my foot touched the floor, I felt the suffocating embrace of the darkness.